Welcome back, welcome back. European heads of state will be holding crucial talks in Lisbon next week to try to agree on the new reform treaty. Critics say it's just a rehash of the old EU constitution that was thrown out by Dutch and French voters in 2005. And there are moves afoot in several countries to try and block the treaty's passage, not least in Holland, one of the countries which voted no to the constitution in 2005. There, the government has decided not to put the treaty to a public vote, but their decision is being challenged in Parliament. And I'm now joined by Harry van Bommell, who led the successful No campaign in Holland 2 years ago, and he's planning to do the same again. That's right, isn't it, Harry?
That's right, yes, very much so.
And how are you going to go about it?
Well, the government decided that the reform treaty is completely different from the constitution that the Dutch voted away. In my point of view, the new treaty is more or less the same as the constitutional treaty. Actually, the British think tank Open Europe said that it was 96% the same. And also a scrutiny committee from Lower House in the UK said it was more or less the same. So, in my point of view, we should have a referendum, and therefore I took the initiative in Parliament to have a new law adopted, and it's being put to Parliament next week, supported by 4 other parties in Parliament, and we hope to get a majority for that law that will enable us to have a referendum in the Netherlands.
But in fact, it's more complicated still than that, isn't it, in the sense that, I mean, it has to be ratified by the cabinet and so on.
That is right, but usually a law that comes from Parliament and that gets a majority in Lower House in the Netherlands and then goes to the Senate is also signed by our cabinet. And we've had a debate on this specific issue, and the government has said that there is no decision taken what our government will do when this law gets a majority in Parliament. So I have good hopes that when we get a majority in Parliament, and there's a lot of discussion on the referendum in the Netherlands, a majority in the public definitely wants a referendum, then I expect our government to also sign that law.
And in this particular situation, you're confident you think you can win the vote and so on. Why are you so against originally the Constitution 2 years ago and now the so-called treaty? I mean, what is your major objection to that?
Well, first of all, I think it's a matter of sovereignty. When it comes to the independence of the member states, the Netherlands, France, but also the UK, then I think that the Parliament does not possess the sovereignty, so we cannot give away sovereignty. Therefore, I think we should have a referendum, and we would advise no to our public to say no, because we're handing over important veto rights. Now, veto rights are very important in the hands of smaller countries, such as the Netherlands. The UK has been so smart as to have an opt-out on handing over veto rights when it comes to justice and home affairs. Our government hasn't even done that. So we are definitely going to advise our voters to say no, because we do not wish the EU to take a step towards a federal Europe at this very moment. Maybe that is something to be done in the future, but not right now. We have enlarged Europe with 10 member states in 2004, 2 states recently. That means that we should grow towards a European average first before we give up more parts of our sovereignty. So we are definitely going to go for a no.
And the President of Europe, President Barroso, said this week in London that this treaty would give more European leverage to tackle big issues like climate change and terrorism. Having one person, a high representative, speaking for the EU to the outside world. That's not a good thing, though, you would say.
No, that's not a good thing, and even the Dutch government has always been against a president for the EU, because that makes the EU look stronger and look more like a state, a European state, than it did before. So I don't think that's a good idea. We should have independent member states that can also protect its own society, protect its own rules and its own culture. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's also nothing wrong with working together, cooperation. We should work together, but that does not mean that we have to give up our own sovereignty.
And so the situation is that if in fact you won in the upper and lower house, and in fact if the cabinet ratified it and so on and so forth, and so no wins the day in the Netherlands, what's next? Do you have to leave the EU, or what's next?
No, that's not the case. I know that some people, even in the government, have been warning for a second no. Well, actually, in the bargaining on the new treaty, in the negotiations, our government hasn't come home with a good package. The British have done a lot better, I must say. So our government should go back to the negotiation table and see what can be done. And it's not just the Netherlands that's having a referendum where a possible no might be the outcome. The Irish are having a referendum, maybe even the Danish. And what we hear is that even Gordon Brown is not leaving the option of a referendum off the table. So there's always the possibility that more countries will have a referendum and more no's will come out. So it's not the end of the EU, and it's not the end of membership of the EU.
Thank you. Well, that's very clear where you stand, and we'll see what happens next. I doubt if Gordon Brown's going to change his mind, but who knows? We'll see. Thank you very much indeed.
We'll see. Thank you very much.
We turn now to the subject of press freedom. Press freedom in Egypt, where 4 editors of leading opposition newspapers face trial and jail time for publishing stories defaming the president and his son Bommell. For example, Ibrahim Issa, the editor of the daily Ad Dastur, is accused of disturbing the peace and damaging national economic interests after publishing rumours about the president's health, claiming that the 79-year-old was either dead or seriously ill or in a coma. But should, such misreporting, if it is misreporting, be illegal? Or should editors in the Middle East be free to publish whatever they want? Joining me today to tell us how these arrests will affect the limits of free speech in Egypt, and in the wider Middle East too, are Lawrence Pintack, academic at the University of Cairo, and Hosni Imam, head of the Kuwaiti news agency in London. Welcome to you both. First of all, starting with you, Lawrence, this specific case of the man who said that Hosni Mubarak might be ill or in a coma and so on, is there any defence if he was in a coma, or is the offence to have said it at all?
Well, first of all, he's not the only one that was reporting about these rumors. He maintains that he didn't report the rumor, but that he said that the president had been ill over a period of time. The key here is that we're looking at the greatest assault on press freedom in Egypt in probably 25 years. We took a couple of steps forward before the elections a few years ago, a lot of press freedom, and now suddenly everything is rolling back, and there's a real chill through the newsrooms here. A real chill, and what sort of a court hearing will these editors get? Will they get a fair trial? Will they be able to appeal to an independent tribunal, or will it all be arranged in advance? Well, first of all, you have to understand that here, unlike many places, particularly in the West, people can be charged with criminal libel. Anyone on the street can sue someone, and if they're found guilty, they go to jail. Issa has already been sentenced to jail for another offense, and that was, quote, insulting the symbols of the state and the party, meaning Mubarak and his son. So there's not a lot of hope here among journalists that he or the others who are facing trial will actually get a fair hearing. Just come to Hosni, who has the same name as, of course, as the president of Egypt, a name which means beauty, I gather.
I believe so, Sir David, yes.
And do you reflect what's gone on so far in the way that Lawrence does?
Well, I believe as a journalist, of course, that we have a sacred duty for freedom of information and the freedom of the media. On the other hand, there are also constraints that would be represented in the fact that we have an influx of information and an explosion of information in the Middle East. So we are in the first stage of a democratic process. Of course, there are mistakes and there are an unbalanced situation where we all stumble, government and media. In the media in the West here, we have the very sacred experience of having the deterrence of a libel and the lawyer sitting in newspapers whereby they can sift through every single article which could be defamatory or spreading misinformation. There are mistakes on both sides, and there are challenges. There are new responsibilities constituted through the freedom of expression.
And would your newspapers in Kuwait have printed these stories as well about the illness, alleged illness of President Mubarak?
I think I can tell you the freedom of media and the expression in Kuwait is so high, to the extent there is a vibrant democracy, vibrant press, but at the same time, if this information is not correct or turns out to be inaccurate, then this is going to constitute a problem. So people have got to be cautious. And in the meantime, you know, you have to respect other countries' traditions and customs.
But I mean, you can't respect the custom if a country, not Egypt in particular, had a custom that they caned all reporters. I mean, you can't respect that.
No, of course, as a journalist, as a correspondent working in London, it's sacred to have freedom of information and freedom of the media, and it pains any journalist, any professional, to feel that there is an infringement on the media or its right to report and mirror what is happening in the country. But there are also excesses, which we have to bear in mind.
Right. Well, let's come back to you, Lawrence. It seemed from what you were saying earlier so that you're probably rather pessimistic about the fact that this is a trend towards less press freedom in Egypt, rather than about to turn around.
Absolutely. One thing I should add is that if you look at what's happening with the media right now, here, truth is not a defense for the media. I agree with Hosni in that, yes, there is a lot of bad journalism here in Egypt and in the Arab world in general. You're just moving from a controlled system to an open system. But even if your facts are right, that is no guarantee. We have one set of people, a head of a labor rights unit and a journalist who wrote for one of their publications, who wrote about corruption, were convicted of criminal libel, even though it appears the charges they made were true. That has been the pattern. So journalists can't rely on the fact that, well, my facts are right, my information is correct, so go ahead and sue me, I'm safe. That's not the case here. And certainly all the indications are, in the broader sense, that this regime is looking to control the flow of information, to rein in conversations, particularly about the transition, what happens after President Mubarak. That seems to be the trend as they crack down on human rights groups, on labor rights groups, on the media, on bloggers, etc.
And who do you think will succeed President Mubarak, incidentally?
Well, the $64 million question. Certainly the indications are it will be his son Gamal. That clearly is where everything is moving. There is no individual we can point to and say, here's another logical alternative. And ultimately it comes down to what's happening behind the scenes in the military and the brotherhood within the National Democratic Party, and that's obtuse at best.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Lawrence, for joining us from Cairo there. And Hosni, thank you very much for joining us here in the studio.
Thank you very
much. We thank you both.
Thank you.
In a moment, as US athlete Marion Jones hands back her gold medals from the Sydney Olympics, I'll be discussing drugs, cheating and sport with Ben Johnson. That's after the news, which is next.